Hi, everyone. We're going to give it another minute or so because it looks like we've got a few latecomers. But I just want to say thanks so much for joining us this morning and welcome to the first ever virtual Illinois Solar Tour. Today, we've got a number of different presentations, but this one is with Kevin McKee in Troy, and he is going to take us on a little tour of his installation and tell us a little bit about how solar works. But before we get to that, we'd really love to do a round of introductions because we find we have a better tour if we're addressing the questions that you specifically have. So I can start. I'm Nicola, and I work for the Illinois Solar Education Association as the program associate. ISEA is a nonprofit. We are both a 501c3 and a C6, which means we do some education and some advocacy. And today we have Kevin, who will do a little introduction of himself, and then we'll ask a little bit about you.
Is that over to me then?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Kevin McKee. I'm a solar ambassador here in Troy in Madison County outside of St. Louis, a few miles. I've been a solar ambassador for ISEA for 7 or 8 years now, and I've had solar on my home for about 9 years and been expanding it slowly over time. I also am involved with some other solar and renewable energy organizations, including the Midwest Renewable Energy Association, another nonprofit that advocates for solar, and their Grow Solar Metro East program, which has been active around here for the past 5 years. So that's my story in a nutshell. I'm retired. This is one of my hobbies, is explaining people how they too can take advantage of solar energy to help reduce their impact on the environment and to reduce their energy bills. I've done all my projects myself, aside from the one I'll talk about. So I'm a do-it-yourselfer. I don't necessarily advocate that for everybody. It takes a lot of homework, a lot of handiness, and the ability to deal with electrical work, carpentry work, plumbing work, and all that, as you'll see as we go through this. So I'll turn it over and ask others to introduce themselves.
Yeah, we'd love to hear where you're from and why you decided to join us on the solar tour today. And you should be able to unmute yourself, but if you feel more comfortable, you can also type that into the chat box and we'll read it out.
Let us know what you're interested in hearing about today. That way I can focus my talking points a little bit. This is going to be very informal. And we'll walk around my installation in my home and show you the pieces and parts.
Hi, I'm Tom Wickland, and we just recently had solar panels put in our house a few months ago, and I'm just listening to see what other people are experiencing, and we're in Buffalo Grove.
Thanks, Tom. Oh, we have Karen in the chat box, who's an architect associate working in Highland. Thanks, Karen. All right. If everybody doesn't want to introduce themselves and just wants to stay along for the ride, that's also okay. We can go into the presentation portion.
I'll unmute myself. I'm talking to myself for a moment there. I'll share screen. And away we go. Hopefully you can see that, Nicola.
Yes.
Okay. And we've already said all this. This year, the virtual Illinois Solar Tour is happening virtually because of the pandemic. We're not meeting in person. Most years I do this in person and have lots of people show up. I've been doing it for a number of years now. These are the topics I can focus on today, depending on what folks are interested in. I will be talking about solar energy generation with solar panels on the roof. And I can talk about solar energy for thermal uses, heating, water, and air. I've got an installation here I'll show you. And we can also talk briefly about geothermal heating and cooling. I have an installation here. I did not install that myself. I'm not an expert on those things. I hired experts to do that. And I also have some electric vehicles. We can discuss that briefly if you'd like. We'll talk about the environmental benefits and the cost after taking a look at the equipment outside. And again, we'll just keep it informal. Before we go outside to look at the equipment, just a couple of short introductions to how solar energy works. In this case, we'll be talking about solar electricity production. This graphic illustrates a pretty typical system that you'll see around here for something we call net metering installation or a grid-tied installation. These installations do not use batteries, but instead rely on a connection to your electric utility to provide power when the sun is not shining. So the electric utility serves as your backup. In this case, we have a PV array. PV stands for photovoltaic array, and that's industry jargon. Basically, what they're saying is this is a collection of solar panels. An array is a collection of solar panels, and we'll take a look at some of those soon. These things typically are, these days, about 3.5 by 5.5 feet wide and about 1 inch thick. They're composed of a glass sheet on the front. Behind that glass sheet is a very thin group of silicon solar cells that actually produce the electricity, and all they require is for the sun to fall on them, any kind of light really, to fall on them in the right spectrum, and they produce direct current instantaneously without any need for other electricity, without fuel, without chemicals. Very clean system. And then behind the solar, the photovoltaic cells themselves, as they're called, is a very thin plastic back sheet to keep it all clean. And then all that is bound in a sandwich between some aluminum frames, aluminum rails. So they're very light. They're about 45 pounds a piece these days, and typically generate about 300 to 330 watts. They're more efficient than the ones I bought 9 years ago. And that reflects the trend in the industry. So these things can be on your roof. They can be out in your yard. They can be on a chicken coop. They can be almost anywhere you want to put them, as long as it's structurally sound and meets code. As I said earlier, they generate direct current like a battery does. They can be wired together to generate higher voltages of direct current, but to convert that energy to a useful form of energy for your home and the appliances, you need something called an inverter. That device, typically about the size of, say, the old computer tower you might have had under your desk at work, is typically near your service panel, your circuit breaker box. This inverter converts the DC directly to AC, and it does that by listening into the power line, the utility line's 60 hertz signal, and it synchronizes with that. It does that so there are no conflicts, and the power is instantaneously available for you to use inside your home. Now, on a sunny day like today is, an installation like this might well produce more electricity than you can use in your home. Under those circumstances, the inverter pushes that out through the service panel and through your utility company's electric meter back out on the utility lines. That way, your neighbors get to use that energy. But the electric company gives you credit against future energy needs, whether it's a dark, cloudy day or at night. And you can carry that credit forward month after month up to a total of 12 months, at which time you're reset to zero and you have to start over again for any extra production you get. So this is the concept of net metering. It's really the cheapest way you can go solar for electricity production, because you're expending with those batteries. You're not using batteries. And it helps the utility out in a way because you're reducing the load during summer hours when there's a lot of use of air conditioning. You're helping them reduce the load on their equipment. So I think we've touched on all these things here. The concept is grid and net metering. And this is pretty much what I have here at my home, except instead of a single inverter, I've got something called a microinverter under each one of my solar panels. And I'll show you what those microinverters look like shortly. The reason I went with that process is because it made it easier for me as a do-it-yourselfer to assemble and to plan out. and also because I had some shady conditions in the morning and the evening that meant that I was going to lose production, significant amounts, without those inverters. So these inverters optimize the production coming out of each one of those solar panels to get the maximum amount. Otherwise, you can lose some power because the inverter seeks to maximize several solar panels together because they're wired that way. And then if you just have a little shade falling on one solar panel, you lose production for that entire string of solar panels that are wired together. It's kind of complicated. I don't fully pretend to understand how the inverter does its optimization thing, but that's not why we're here today. So that in a nutshell is how most solar installations work here in Southern Illinois. And this is my home wherein I have implemented this kind of scheme. The 16 solar panels you see here on the right side of this image are the ones that I installed 9 years ago. Each one of those has a microinverter behind it. And then over here, you'll see 8 more that I installed after my wife talked me into buying electric cars and our usage went up. It still wasn't quite enough. But I'll go outside in a minute and show you these close up. And then you'll see also, this is my solar thermal installation where I've got panels that collect the heat of the sun and heat water, preheat water that goes to my water heater, and put any excess heat into my basement for space heating. And I'll show you what that looks like. So at this point, Nicole, I'm going to disconnect my headphones and walk out to my cell phone so I can show folks closer view outside. So I need to stop sharing. And I'm going to mute this now. Okay, so hopefully you can hear me. How's that, Nicola?
Clear. You sound great.
Okay, good. The wind's not too bad today, so I won't have a lot of interference, I hope. So close up on the solar panels that I installed 9 years ago. These, like I said, about 3.5 by 5.5 feet. They're a little dirty right now. There's been a lot of pollen in the air, not a lot of rain to wash them off. They don't take much maintenance. If any maintenance, I just usually let the rain wash them off. Maybe once every couple of years I get up there and check them out. And you can see on the end here, I've got aluminum rails sticking out. I didn't trim them off, so it might not look as neat as a professional installation. I had originally intended to leave those there so that if I expanded, I would expand there. I decided to do something different later. And you can see they're held down with little aluminum clips. The aluminum rails beneath the panels are connected to L-shaped feet that are lag screwed into the roof through the shingles. These are just conventional shingles. And the L feet are protected from leakage by aluminum flashing as well as some rubberized sealer. And I've not had any leaks or anything like that so far. Knock on wood. And then the other array over here just looks the same. They're identical panels. Each one of them has a microinverter underneath. I'll show you what a microinverter looks like here. This is an old one I removed when I upgraded my microinverters. I was having a few failures. Fortunately, the company that manufactured these, Enphase, made good on their warranties and replaced all those failures. It turns out that the earlier generations were more sensitive to heat than they thought they were. They are now warranting these things for 25 years, which amazes me, frankly, the newer generation microinverters. So looking forward to seeing those last a little longer. Now all those solar panels on the roof with their microinverters are connected through a little junction box there that goes through the roof, down through the attic and to this circuit breaker box on the side of my porch. You can see on the circuit breaker box it says disconnect for isolation from generation. That's something that's required by the power company and the code around here. And then over here we have a knife switch for cutting off the entire solar array from our electrical so that if there's a lineman working on power lines, hello, somebody asking a question?
Nope, I don't think so.
Okay, maybe a little background noise. And then, so the service disconnect here, this switch box, is intended to help firefighters as well as the linemen so they stay safe. There's no electric generation happening for them to get shocked in case of an emergency. This is just a standard circuit breaker box on the outside of the house where each one of those, we'll call them lines of solar panels, is connected through an individual circuit breaker. And then there's a master circuit breaker as well. Seems like overkill to have all those switches, but that's what the power company required here in Ameren territory. And then that goes down through conduit to the basement to my main circuit breaker box, which we'll show you in a bit how that's arranged. And then here's the upgraded Ameren power meter. This power meter is a digital one. It monitors the incoming power from the power company as well as the outgoing power that I produce when I can't use all that power on a sunny day like today. The difference between those, sometimes, you know, the amount of power that I actually use on site before it goes out for my neighbors to use is something that is just a matter of simple math. You have to kind of do the, get on the software and figure out how much did I actually produce and what's the difference between that and what Ameren billed me for. So that's what we'll see from the outside here for my solar installation. Really very simple, very little maintenance involved. In my case, I did have to replace a few of those failed microinverters, but they're warranting those things for longer periods these days, so they're more reliable apparently. And hopefully if any of you go that route, you'll have the experience of long-term maintenance free operation, or if you've had it done through a solar vendor, they will make good on any warranties they have for labor and installation on those. So this is my solar thermal project. I designed and installed this myself. It was a lot of work. I made a lot of mistakes on it and spent more than I intended to. Spent a couple years reconfiguring the pumping station and stuff like that downstairs. Basically what we have here on the outside of the garage is a vertically mounted set of 6 collectors. These collectors have copper tubing behind aluminum absorbers that are painted black. These are all on the opposite side of the glazing here. The glazing is not glass, it's actually a clear fiberglass meant for greenhouses. It's not as efficient as I originally expected it would be because the fiberglass is not as clear as I wanted it to be, not as clear as glass, and it reflects some of the sunlight. And also it's in a vertical orientation instead of directly facing the sun. Well, there's a reason I did that, and that was so that I wouldn't have too much heat in the summertime and have to come up with a way to dump all that excess heat or have a system failure. So I installed these vertical, and there's a little overhang there. You can see some shadow, so that in wintertime, we actually get more thermal energy out of this than we do in the summertime. That's by intention. So far, this part of the system has been maintenance free. That hasn't bothered me at all. It doesn't produce enough to heat my house, but enough to preheat the water for my water heater. And on a day like today, it can reach 110 degrees easily or more, depending on where I've set the system. And then I also have, during the wintertime, the ability to dump any excess heat into my basement air through baseboard heaters, just hydronic baseboard heaters like you can get at Home Depot. And most of this stuff I bought through Menards or Home Depot, by the way. So I'm going to go back inside now. If you have any questions, always willing to take them anytime throughout the presentation. Intend for this to be informal and give and take. I lost signal for a minute there, but I think I'm getting it back. Still with me, Nicola?
Yep, we're all good.
Okay. This is my fairly junky basement. And this is my pump for my solar thermal system. If you can hear some background hum, that's because it's actually pumping right now on a sunny day. And what you see is the pump down here at the bottom and lots of valves and control circuitry. These two boxes monitor the temperature of the solar or the solar collectors out on the garage. And then this box manages the valves and the pump. These are just components you can buy at Menards. And then over here we have the valves that are operated by that green control box there. So the hot water comes down from the garage into the basement, gets distributed through these valves here. In one case, I've got these two lines going to my hydronic heaters, baseboard heaters, and then the one on the far right is for my water heater. That's the one that's actually operating right now. So that's solar thermal in a nutshell. Right now, the collector is reading about 102 degrees and the tank is about 98 degrees. And then just across the room here, you'll see the remainder of my solar electric installation. The wires I mentioned earlier are coming down from the porch up there and into the circuit breaker box. In the circuit breaker box here, one, possibly two circuit breakers are required to accept and manage those that power coming from the roof. We also have these two boxes here, this white box and this black box. These are from that in-phase manufacturer. They are designed to interface with the Wi-Fi and talk to those microinverters via the power lines. So they monitor the production of the power and they can tell me online on any device, a cell phone or my computer, wherever I am in the world, how my system is performing. And this top one up here actually has a readout on it that I don't know if you can see it. Says it's producing about 1.42 kilowatts right now and about 49 megawatt hours for its lifespan, the entire lifespan of that array, which is, I think, 5 years now. And then the one on the bottom is a newer device that talks to the upgraded microinverters I bought. They're not quite compatible with the old microinverters, so I still have these two monitoring systems. The newer system has all these excess wires here that can connect inside your circuit panel so that you can monitor production and usage more closely. It's not fully implemented for me here because these two systems aren't quite compatible. Turns out they won't work together. But otherwise, the system works great. I've had lots of production. I'll show you in a few minutes what that looks like. The box in the middle, by the way, is just a circuit breaker box for my geothermal system. So I'm kind of going about this in maybe a rather disorganized fashion because of the location of where all this equipment is. This tank is my preheater tank where the solar hot water feeds into. It's about 50 gallons. It's a stainless steel tank. I spent more money for it because it came along with my geothermal system, and the stainless steel was just going to last longer for my purposes here. So it feeds into a propane fueled hot water tank, nothing special about it. One of these days when it fails, I'm going to replace it with an on-demand heater so I can reduce my usage of propane entirely. And then next to all this is my geothermal system. This is the fan coil unit that distributes into the house. It dumps when it is operating in either air conditioning mode or cooling mode. It dumps any excess heat from its processes after it's shut down into this solar preheat tank as well. Questions? No questions? Okay. So if there's no sun, the geothermal system, when it's running, either heating or cooling season, can preheat my water to 85 degrees or so, just with that excess heat when it shuts down. And then the solar, as you saw, can reach 105, 110 degrees depending on the amount of sun I have. So all in all, it saves me, I think, 80% in propane expenses compared to where we were a few years ago, where we had a propane furnace and everything was run by propane. So the geothermal uses also this water distribution system. In this case, the water goes out into my backyard, and this is the pump box for it. But the water goes out in the backyard. I've got 4 wells out there that were drilled to 200-foot plus depth to accommodate this system. I think it's rated at 4 tons, if that means anything to anyone. Who is the manufacturer of the geothermal system and its installer? Well, the installer is Ernst. They're based out of, let's see, it's a town nearby on the tip of my tongue, and I'm forgetting it. Hamel, Illinois. They did great work. They subcontracted to somebody who actually did the drilling, another company by the name of, I forget. Sorry. The equipment is, let's see, this is called Navigator. Now, that's a great question. You know, I never bothered to remember what the brand name was for this. Let's look behind here. GeoComfort is a brand that Ernst Heating and Cooling carries. Hope that helps. We like the system so far?
Sorry?
Go ahead.
We have a question from Paul who would like to know about the cost of each system.
Okay. Yep. I've got some slides that talk to that in a minute. I don't have all of it handy at the top of my head. I will tell you that the geothermal cost $24,000 up front. That's a lot of money. But we needed a new furnace. We were determined to reduce our impact on the environment, reduce our reliance on propane, fossil fuels. So we spent the money, and at that time, I think there was a 30% rebate from the federal government on geothermal systems? I think that was the case. And then, let's see, my photovoltaic system, the electric power system, altogether with the upgrades and everything I did, cost about $24,000 up front, but there were lots of incentives. I'm going to change to the other computer, so you'll hear me go silent for a second here. Back with you. Let me mute my phone. There we go. And let's see, I'm going to go back to screen share so I don't have to remember everything. I've got a little bit of echo here. So the solar electric was about $25,000 up front, and the net cost after all the incentives from the state and the federal government I came to about $85, my net expense. So that's a huge amount. I think it was about 60% or so that I ended up saving through those incentives. The incentives are set to decrease in the next year or two, both from the feds and the state, but we're hopeful that those can be extended so that we can continue deploying solar across not just Illinois, but the country. I have a net payback period of about 15 years. Some people are doing better than that today, about 10 years, because of the incentives, but also because the cost of the equipment has come down dramatically since I purchased it initially 9 years ago. And the technology is better, as I mentioned earlier. Some of it's getting more reliable. So some of us who like to be early adopters are sometimes taking risks of adopting that new technology, but hopefully we've helped to move the industry forward too. Now that solar electricity gives us about 65% of our needs. What we've decided to do is to use community solar to get the remainder of our needs met. Community solar is a concept whereby you can, I'm still getting an echo. I'm trying to figure out why that is.
You sound great on our end.
Okay, then I'll just keep talking. Community solar is a concept wherein you can do the net metering thing like I described, but instead of having solar on your own property, it's off-site on, say, a big piece of farmland where there are thousands of these things, and some company is managing it and giving you credit for solar power produced by your portion of that. Maybe you're subscribed for 10 or 20 or however many panels to offset your needs for your home. And it's the same kind of concept that we use when we install solar here, except it's just not on our property. And I am told by the company that I went with for community solar that the cost will be 20% less than what I'm spending now for my utility energy needs. So that'll be welcome, and I won't need to do any more self-installation. So that's a great opportunity, by the way, if you're an apartment dweller, if you don't own your property, or if you have a shady property, you don't necessarily have to put the solar panels on your property. They can be off-site. As long as you're in Ameren territory, co-ops and municipal power companies may be not so friendly to those concepts.
Can you hear me, Kevin?
I can. Go ahead.
Yeah, are you Ameren territory or ComEd?
I'm in Ameren territory.
Do you have a real-time price option in Ameren like we have in ComEd?
There is that option. I don't think it's available to me, however, for reasons I don't quite understand. Yeah, it's available to some subscribers down here. I think it's because of the portion of the territory I'm in, perhaps.
Right. I save about, I've been on 12 years here, save about 35% total on my bottom line bill because of the capacity charge savings that we don't have to pay. And then most of the community solars that are up here in Chicago that are offering are about 20% off your energy supply charge. And I think that nets down to about 8, 9, 10% off the bottom line bill. So I don't know if that's kind of what you're seeing in Ameren.
Yeah, excellent. I'm hoping to see that. The community solar installation to which I have subscribed has not yet been built. It should be built by late winter, I understand. We'll see how that works. I suppose a lot depends on weather. So you can see here some factoids on our solar electric installation. I've already talked a few of them. Over 9 years, we've saved about $4,700 on electric bills, according to my estimate. And then that's the equivalent of not burning 20 tons of coal or having 3 or 4 acres of forest during those entire 9 years, removing carbon from the atmosphere. So it's a drop in the bucket compared to where we need to be, but if more of us do things like this, we'll get where we need to be, I'm confident, in terms of protecting our environment. Now, I earlier talked about the cartoon I had that showed how solar electric worked. I forgot to show this cartoon on how solar thermal worked. If anybody's interested in that, we can talk to it a little bit more, or we can just move on and talk other things. Preferences, anybody?
Yeah, Kevin, on your solar thermal there, what is the lifetime expectancy on that? If you keep proper maintenance, what are you expecting and how long a life?
Well, it's an excellent question. It's hard to say because I did it myself. I've had to do lots of repairs over the years because I'm not much of a plumber. If it were done by a professional plumber, somebody who did solar thermal professionally, the expected lifetime could be 30 years or more because it's copper, it's stainless steel. Just like the plumbing in your house, it should last quite some time. Now, I think one of the shorter lifespan components of my system probably is that fiberglass glazing I have out there because it gets cloudy with age. So hindsight being closer to 2020, what I should have done was use glass instead of that fiberglass glazing.
Is that potable expansion tank, do you use that as a supplemental heat over to the geothermal heat core exchanger, or are they separate?
No, I don't dump heat to the geothermal. I didn't even entertain that thought when I had it installed. Instead, I just dump any excess heat directly from the solar panels into the coils I have in my room, my basement at the baseboard, and I forgot to show you those. I've already kind of disconnected my phone. But suffice it to say, they're just baseboard heaters that are about 10 feet long with copper pipe in them and fins on them, just like the modern thermal radiators. So that's how I deal with the excess thermal heat.
Also, speaking of the geothermal, I had a question from CCOM. Do you have annual maintenance or service calls of the geothermal system?
Right, yeah, we do have an annual service need for that, and it's to replace not just a filter. The filter is pretty easy to replace, but there's a module in there that we purchased as a premium that has, and that's why the price was so high, partly because we went the premium route. There's an ultraviolet light in there that is intended to kill bacteria and things in the air like that. That needs to be replaced every year. So that's something that I have done, but there's also the need to check on the water system and the refrigerants in the system, which I can't do. I'm not qualified to do. So I do pay somebody to come out and look at that every year. I've only had it a couple years so far. I do not have a diagram of a geothermal system. I meant to do that, but do not.
You mentioned, Kevin, of that ultraviolet light. Does that mean you're also harvesting water and then using that as potable, or totally separate again?
Oh no, the ultraviolet light inside the geothermal ductwork simply sanitizes the air that's circulated within the house. That's all it does. Did I understand your question correctly? You're asking.
Yeah, you answered that right, Kevin. The reason
Okay.
I heard ultraviolet, my parents harvest water in Texas due to the high cost of drilling 900, 1,000 feet down to get a well. It's much cheaper to harvest off your roof
I
for
see.
them. And so they use an ultraviolet light to sanitize the water so they can drink it. And it's fantastic.
Yeah, I use city water here, so don't worry about that. I do collect rainwater for my garden, though. I've got some huge tanks out there, but I don't bother to sanitize it because that's all I use it for is the garden.
Yeah, it's nice to have a low price water bill. Here in Chicago, we're over 2 cents a gallon for water.
Yeah. Wow, that is high. I don't have a clue what it is here, but we use the minimum because we use that rainwater for outdoor work, and it's just the two of us here. So our water bill on a monthly average is about $25. Some factoids on the solar thermal and the geothermal. I think I mentioned some of these before when I was walking around showing the equipment to you. The solar thermal, which I didn't mention, costs somewhere in excess of $3,000. I didn't really keep track of it, and I didn't file for the incentives because so much of what I was doing I considered just experimental or play. Honestly, it was just a fun project. And then total geothermal cost, yeah, 30% federal tax incentive reduced that to about $17,000. Still pricey, but hopefully will last for many years and increases the value of our property as well. So we've got an 80% reduction in propane usage, and that means about $1,000 a year off of our propane bill. We still use propane for topping off the heat of our water as well as for drying clothes, and that's really all we use it for. And I may convert all that to electric in the coming couple of years. So any other questions on those issues? Geothermal, solar electric, solar thermal? Okay. We also have a couple of electric cars that I can talk about a little bit. Obviously, I didn't build those. I've heard of people doing it, but that's beyond my abilities. We've got 2 electric cars. One of them is a hybrid, a Ford C-Max Energy that we bought in 2014. I think the model year was 2013. Maybe it was before that we bought it. It was kind of pricey, $37,000 before incentives, and then the incentives were, I forget, maybe $7,500 at that time for hybrids and electrics. And then it only had an 18-mile battery-only range. But that was fine for the way we use it, which is commuting around town, going to the grocery store, and things like that. And it averages about 58 miles per gallon over its lifetime, because that's the way we do many of the miles. It does get 40 mile per gallon highway in gasoline mode. And so far we've got a lot of miles driven. It's not needed a whole lot of maintenance, honestly. 40,000 of those miles electric miles. We do use this for traveling cross country to New York, Pennsylvania, wherever we go to visit relatives. So it's handy that way. The Ford Focus Electric we bought in 2014, give or take, cost about as much. And I think we actually got more incentives for it than the other car. It has about a 65-mile range. That's what's advertised by the company. And so far I've driven 65,000 miles at the equivalent of 2,700 gallons of gas saved. Yeah, saves money on electricity. And I like to say that we're driving on solar power. I actually have solar powered stickers on the back of each of these on the trunks. And we like to say we charge them with the solar energy from our roof, although in reality, as I noted, we're only getting about 65% of our electric needs from solar right now. We hope to fix that with community solar. This little car, the Ford Focus Electric, was useful when I was working in St. Louis. I commuted about 24 miles each way and got me there and back. In the wintertime, it was a little bit of a challenge because the range reduces. The batteries don't like cold weather. And on a day when we might have snow or ice, I generally drove a different vehicle for reasons of comfort. I could charge in St. Louis, a few blocks from where I worked, but it wasn't very convenient in nasty weather to walk between my place of work and a charging station. It was kind of hazardous. So it's good for commuting short distances. It's no Tesla. It's not exactly a sports car, but it does what it was built for. Now, neither of these cars are produced anymore. Ford saw fit to quit producing electrics for a while. Now they're trying to get back into the game, but they're not doing these kind of cars. And yeah, we've got a charger in the garage. It's not visible here. You can see the car is plugged in. It can recharge that fully electric car in about 2.5 hours. So I think that's most of what I had prepared to say today. You can find more details on my website. I also have a video on the ISEA site that is another virtual solar tour. If you Google Tinkering Caveman Solar, you're sure to find that website here, by the way, instead of typing in that whole sequence. And then if you're interested in going solar, you haven't already, ISEA has a Find a Professional tool on their website. They can show you professionals within certain radius of your location. Now, to be sure, not all solar installers are present on that Find a Professional site. You might hear of some in your area that are not. They're just not members of ISEA. There may be perfectly qualified solar installers. They're just not part of ISEA. We'd always love to have you become a member of ISEA to help educate the public. You can get discounts to ISEA events and classes. You can get training, voting rights for the ISEA board, and more. And help by making solar more commonly known out there to the public and its advantages. They do have a lot of public education available there, not just things like we're doing today, but more detailed things about community solar, by the way. And it's not all just solar. ISEA is also about other forms of renewable energy, but maybe there's a little less focus on it. So there you go. That's what I have to say today. Always willing to take on more questions.
Thanks so much, Kevin. I think it was an excellent presentation. I don't see any other questions in the chat box. If you have them, feel free to type them in or unmute yourself and ask them in person.
Hey, Kevin, can you hear me again? This is Rex.
I can.
Yeah, on the Ford electric car, the four-door sedan, that had battery management system that had, I think, heating and cooling. Was it the cold temperature of you trying to keep your cabin warm in the winter? Or was it just the degradation of the battery of, say, 40, 50% that the battery management system couldn't overcome that caused you to not want to take the car? And then I guess a third wrap up on that would be, what kind of car are you thinking on next to replace it?
Okay, well, I'll answer the last question first. I'd love to have some kind of Tesla. And by the way, ISEA has a raffle for a Tesla, $100 a ticket. And what is it, Nicola? $2,500 or 2,500 tickets only are issued?
Yeah, only 2,500 tickets. One ticket for 100 and 4 tickets for 300. And I can get that link in the chat box too, if you'd like.
It sounds kind of steep, but the odds are much better than the lottery, right? So, see if I understand your questions correctly. I ended up not using heat to heat the cabin if I could avoid it while I was driving. And if I needed to defrost, I just turn it on for a little while to clear the windshield and then turn it off to conserve battery. Because it just, it was the unpredictability. I might get home after that commute, 50-mile commute without charging. I might have only 5 miles left on the battery doing all that. I can't answer questions about the battery management system. I just don't know enough about it to say whether it was effective or not. But suffice it to say that with that 50-mile round trip, give or take a couple miles, I felt like in really bad weather, I just didn't want a chance driving that car that distance. A Tesla, on the other hand, you got the bigger battery pack, and they got better maybe management systems. The Ford, both Fords, I'll tell you that those Fords were not designed from the ground up to be electric cars. They took existing cars and they shoved a battery pack in the back end, taking up a whole bunch of trunk space. And so there are a whole lot of inefficiencies, I think, and they could have gotten more batteries in if they did something like Tesla, which was design a car to be electric from the ground up and identify where to put those batteries. They chose not to do that. These cars were created mainly for the to answer the EPA regulations for, we want you to have more, vehicle miles in your fleet, or whatever that, I don't remember the name of those regulations, but California and the EPA were requiring better mileage for the vehicle fleets. Hope that answers your question to the best of my ability. Okay, great, Rex, thanks. Yep, love to have a Tesla. I saw a BMW i3 this morning around town. That's a cute little car with a 150-mile estimated range, give or take. I might entertain a BMW or something. I'll have to look into them.
I've got 2 cars, so it's once you go electric, it's hard to go back.
Yeah, it's a whole lot less maintenance in general. You don't have to worry about replacing brakes or exhaust systems. You don't have oil to change. You don't have spark plugs to swap. All those kind of things that we used to worry about that went bad just last longer because of the way they're built and because you don't need those things.
Okay. It looks like we're coming up at the end of the hour. So if you have any final questions, now is the time. And in the meantime, thanks so much, Kevin, for an excellent presentation. And thank you all for joining us this morning. We are having a few other presentations today, which you're welcome to join because everyone's got a different solar story.
Absolutely, yeah, some great experiences out there. Good thing to learn from somebody who's already been through it. Thanks much, Nicola, and thanks to everyone for attending.
Yeah, thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Take care.